I met my now husband in a failed foursome our significant others made us have. 6 years ago, I was married to someone I thought was the love of my life. We always promised to never stray, and he seemed to be very against cheating. However, when I was pregnant, our intimacy life decreased, and I noticed he started paying attention more to his phone. My husband came home one day to me and told me he wanted to swing with this woman at college and her boyfriend. I was shocked and heartbroken. I told him why, and if he didn't want me anymore, he could have just said so. He said it wasn't it at all, he just wanted an adventure. Turns out later, he just wanted to be with that new lady. Her fetish is to have her boyfriend watch. I agreed because I was pathetic and I loved my husband, plus we had a 6-month-old baby at home. We met this other couple, and I sensed that the guy wasn't into it at all. We met 2 times before the actual day. On the second time, the boyfriend and I confessed that we weren't really into this. We texted the whole next day and came to the conclusion that we might as well have fun. When the actual day came, the boyfriend and I confessed that we weren't really into this. We texted the whole next day and came to the conclusion that we might as well have fun. When the actual day came, the boyfriend and I spent more time on each other, and basically we forgot about our significant others, until the girlfriend started yelling at us to stop because this is not how it's supposed to happen. To be honest, I had no idea how things were supposed to happen. I was just trying my best, plus her and my husband probably just wanted an excuse to sleep together. My husband wasn't happy either, and he started accusing me of cheating. I asked for divorce there and then. Have you ever asked for divorce naked in a foursome? Next day the boyfriend asked me out and I said yes. We resumed what we started the previous day, and it was electric. I have been with him ever since, married for 4 years. We try to avoid the "how did you guys meet" question. Sometimes we say through mutual friends. Today I messed up by learning sign language. The guy my mom's dating is deaf. Little did I know that secretly understanding sign language would expose me to disturbingly intimate conversations between my mom and the new man in her life. My mom's been involved with this new guy for a few months now. To be fair, enough time has passed for me to stop referring to him as the new guy, but he's not my dad, and I guess that will always make him feel like the new guy. According to movie logic, I'm supposed to hate him for trying to replace my father or whatever. But the truth is, I like him. I like him so much that I've been learning how to use sign language to improve our communication because new guy happens to be deaf. He can read lips, which is how I've been communicating with him. My mom didn't waste any time learning sign language at the beginning of their romance, and she's at the point now where she can have full conversations without using her voice. I was really proud of her, and so was new guy. I'm not on their level yet, but I've had enough practice to follow a conversation that's not too complicated. My plan was to surprise new guy on his birthday, which is 2 months from now, and wish him a happy birthday as well as officially welcoming him to the family in sign language. However, I never factored in the amount of dirty talk my mom and new guy were having in sign language. Not knowing that I can understand them, my mom and new guy have gotten disturbingly comfortable exposing their intimacy life in my company. It didn't matter if we were at the dinner table or watching TV. I would constantly catch so many dirty descriptions being communicated between the two of them. They are worse than horny teenagers, and I should know I am one. 17-year-old son should ever witness his mother use her fingers to demonstrate how wet her vey is. It's gotten to the point where I'm no longer willing to wait until new guy's birthday to make it known that I can understand sign language, because holy if I need my eyes to not see this crap anymore. This is an ongoing F up. My mother-in-law shows her true monstrous colors. My husband is quite literally the man of my dreams, and I have an amazing life with him now. My parents and the rest of my family love him. I'm Native American, and have a really big family, and he comes to family events, holidays, cookouts, etc. And I haven't heard a single member of my family say they didn't like him. My husband's family is very small. Other than his parents, he has 1 brother, his wife, and their 2 kids. His brother and his family live multiple states away, so we only see them around the holidays, and they don't really have much, and his family live multiple states away, so we only see them around the holidays, and they don't really have much extended family. So the only members of my husband's family I really see are his parents. His parents are the stereotypical white conservative small-town Christians. My husband is no longer religious. Mother-in-law stays at home and tends to the house while father-in-law works. I was worried about his parents' beliefs at first as I practiced my native tribe's spiritual beliefs. I'm very left-leaning socially and politically, don't dress very conventional, and my husband and I have no desire to have children, but they were pretty chill with me when I met them the first time. His dad, I've had no problems with, but over time, I've begun having trouble with his mother. She just flat out doesn't like me. According to my father-in-law, she has said I'm not the kind of woman that needs to be with her son. Reasoning is because I don't act like a woman, I won't be a housewife, and I have a man's job. I'm a flight paramedic for a service that airlifts critically unstable patients. I love my job and I love being a paramedic. My husband has never expressed that he wants me to be a housewife or take up a stereotypically feminine job. If he did, we wouldn't be together. But apparently, that's what his mother thinks he needs. When I first met his parents, we had been dating for about 5 months. Mother-in-law said at first that I didn't look like the kind of woman my husband would bring home. I didn't take it to heart. I figured she didn't mean it in a harsh way. When they asked what I did for work, I told them I was a flight medic. Father-in-law said that was foursome, while mother-in-law just kind of frowned and didn't say anything. Whatever. She was pretty cordial in the beginning, but as my husband and I got more and more serious, she began to not like me more. It started out with snide comments she would manage to sneak into conversations. The fact that she thinks women should be homemakers or have jobs like teacher or caretaker. When started working 48-hour shifts, she asked who was going to take care of the housework. My husband told her he would while I was gone those 2 days. She got upset and said it wasn't fair that I made her son do it all by himself while I left. My husband told her that we split household chores evenly and that it was fine. One day we were over, and she went off on this rant about how she missed when women acted like women and men acted like men. She started talking about how women needed to start being housewives and mothers again, while the men worked and provided. While she never directly said it, I knew she included me in that. Father-in-law told her to calm down and that this wasn't the time for that kind of discussion, and she got mad and said, well, it's just the truth, and looked in my direction. I'm not an idiot. I knew this rant was just a way for her to tell me how she felt without directly telling me. My mother-in-law shows her true monstrous colors. My husband was pretty angry when we left, and I can't say I was too pleased. I told him she was allowed to have her opinion no matter how stupid it was, and I wasn't going to lose sleep over the fact that she seems to still be living in the 1950s. He said he was angry about the blatant disrespect. He talked to her about it and said she wouldn't do it again. So I managed to let that situation roll off my shoulders. Everything came to a head with her a few weeks ago. Father-in-law invited us over for dinner, so we went. My cousin is getting married in a few months, and my husband mentioned that we were going to the wedding. It will be a traditional wedding in accordance with our tribe's customs. Father-in-law said that was cool. My mother-in-law asked if there was going to be alcohol there. I didn't really see how that was an issue, so I said yes. She responded with, son, you don't need to be around all that drinking. My husband said it was fine and that it wouldn't be a problem. She said, no, you don't need to go. It's not safe if there's going to be alcohol there. I said, why wouldn't it be safe? It's not like we're going to be at one bar. It's just going to be my family. She then said, well, some people can get violent when they drink. I knew exactly what some people meant and that this was a prejudiced remark. I told her that no one would be getting violent and that everyone would have a designated driver. My husband then said that we were going, and there wasn't going to be any negotiation about it because he was a grown man and could make decisions for himself. That just made her more upset, and she started going off about how it wasn't a good idea for him to be around a bunch of drunk people. After my father-in-law told her to calm down, my husband asked why it mattered so much to her anyway. Because it's not like we were forcing her to go with us. She then said, I just don't think it's a good idea for you to be around a bunch of intoxicated native Indians. I was in shock. I knew this is what she meant, but I didn't think she had the brashness to flat out say it. You can't be serious, I said. She proceeded to tell me, I am serious. I know how you people are, and I don't want my son around it. My husband began to lose it and started yelling at her. I honestly didn't have a response to that. I was just dumbfounded, as was my father-in-law. My husband told her he would not stand for her blatant disrespect and hatefulness any longer and was not going to allow her to be prejudiced towards me. She then said, I can't believe you're seriously choosing this red skin, be word over your own mother. I gave birth to you. I told her to F off and left out the front door with my husband following me. She came running out the door after him, begging him not to leave. He then told her, "No, F you. You're nothing to me, and I never want to hear from or see you again." He was shaking with anger when he got in the car and told me he was done with her and her BS, and that we wouldn't be going back over there. Ever since then, she has been blowing up our phone, saying she's sorry, and begging. The customer who tipped a fake $100 bill. I work as a server. This one guy always comes to the restaurant I work at. He usually is pretty quiet and never tips too well. Most of the time he comes with a couple of friends or by himself and sits at the bar and watches a sports game. I've never had a problem with him until he came in one time with a date. I've never seen the woman before, so I assumed they were new to dating. Anyways, they sat at a table this time in a more quiet part of the restaurant, and they were sitting at one of my tables. I had no problem with them, and everything was going fine. They asked for the check, and I went right around the corner from their table. It was close by, so I was quick. As I was coming back to the table, the guy says to the woman, "Watch this," as he puts down a $100 bill on the table. He saw me, and he was joking like, "Oh, you weren't supposed to see that." I was ecstatic either way, even though it was so obvious he was trying to impress the woman. I didn't care. I waited till they left to go grab the $100 bill. Well, when I unfolded it, it was one of the fake $100 bills, I guess, for pranks. That means this freaking guy planned this out to impress this woman. It was so frustrating because I needed the money, but at the same time I thought it was because I did a great job. Either the woman was in on it, or he decided to be a jerk in two different ways. Told my manager and he was like, "Wow, that's ridiculous." I decided to hold on to it because I knew the day would come when I could get back at this guy. 2 weeks later. My manager recognized the guy, and while I was the day would come when I could get back at this guy. 2 weeks later. My manager recognized the guy, and while I was working at the time, I was in a different side of the restaurant which was already full. My manager found me and asked if I wanted that customer's table as well, and told me he was with the woman from last time. I often joke with my manager about throwing the fake $100 back on the table in front of that woman if he ever came back to embarrass him. I thought to myself, yeah, I may be busy already, but I also thought, sure, what's one more table? Told my manager absolutely, no problem, with a smirk on my face. Before I went over to their table, I ran out to my car to grab the fake $100 that was sitting in my cup holder for this exact moment. I got to their table and they instantly recognized me. The woman seemed normal, but the guy looked like he was nervous. I pretended nothing happened all the way until I got their check. When I brought the check back, I placed it down on the table, as well as the fake $100, but left it unfolded so the fake part was showing. I looked at the guy and said, "Hey, not sure if you remember me from last time, but I believe you forgot this." Just returning it because I believed it was too much. The woman looked very confused, so I instantly knew she was not a part of it, but the guy got all nervous and said, "I don't know what that is." I said, "Oh, my mistake," and laughed and said to the woman, "Have a good night," and walked away. When I came back, there was a big $0 on the signed copy and a $50 bill reel this time, where the woman was sitting after they had left. One can only assume that the guy didn't want a tip on his card, so he wrote obnoxiously big zeros on the tip, and that $50 just happened to be where the woman was sitting, so I'm hoping she had placed it there. Now I don't know what happened with the couple, or if they stayed together, but I haven't seen them back since, and it's been a few weeks. And I really hope she looks for his red flags now. He punched me over a fender bender. I destroyed his life. I was working as a civilian with the U.S. military overseas, and I lived off base in an apartment complex popular among the U.S. military. One morning I accidentally hit another soldier's vehicle. Upon exiting the vehicle, I noticed that both our vehicles were what you could call a hoopty. A hoopty is an old car that is pretty beat up that has been passed around from service to service member, and they generally sell for $1,000 to $2,000. I also recognized that I was at fault for the accident. It was a very minor accident. His rear bumper was dented in slightly, but I could hear both our cars still running. I approached the driver who had already gotten out, and he was in uniform, and I apologized and said if it was all right with him. I'd like to negotiate a payment that I will pay him in cash, and we don't involve the authorities. I wanted to keep this simple. I'll be honest, the accident was so minor, I honestly expected him to say, "Nah man, it's good." But even if he wanted some money, I'd have paid him. I have always been of the opinion if you have a fender bender and can negotiate agreeable terms between both the parties, it's best to not involve insurance/police. He told me he wanted to call the police. I said we could call the police or we could go on base together, and I could give him $300. He said that wasn't enough. So I upped my offer to $500. He proceeded to punch me in the face. It was a sucker punch. He got into his car and took off, and in the process, nearly ran me over. Now I had a black box in my car which recorded everything. I went to the provost marshal office on base, the police station, and reported the accident and the assault and showed the MP the footage, which they used his license plate to track him down. I was also asked if I wanted to involve the local authorities/press criminal charges off base. Honestly, I felt like the soldier would learn his lesson if I let UMCJ, the military court basically, handle this. And I said not. At this time I was told it was an option. The end result was the soldier in question got 60 days of extra duty, reduction in rank, and forfeited a portion of his paycheck. Essentially, if he dealt with that, this would have been the end of the whole ordeal. Honestly, at this point I assumed our little ordeal was over. Well, a few days after his punishment was decided on, which was not long after the incident itself, I was in the commissary, grocery store on base, shopping, when the soldier who assaulted saw me and began to insult me. I told him he needed to clam down, that he should learn his lesson. He told me I was a coward who didn't know how to take a punch. I reminded him that I held back on destroying his life. He told me he's already been punished, and I can't touch him again. He left me be a store employee witness the entire encounter, and I got the employee detail and reported this interaction to his command. His commander told me he had been ordered to not interact with me and would take action. His commander also recommended I involve the local authorities, since this soldier obviously isn't learning his lesson. So I did. I contacted an attorney. The attorney was unsure if we could successfully sue the soldier and said he would need a cash payment to take the case. Honestly, I was mad, and I wanted to teach this guy a lesson. I agreed. It was not cheap. To keep this story short, we ended up in a court off base. We presented our evidence. The soldier in question had decided to represent himself. My wife admitted to abusing our estranged daughter after denying it for over 20 years. And I have no idea what to do. I admittedly have not been the greatest father. I drowned myself in work throughout my children's childhoods and was not always present, though I did try to be as much as I could. My wife and I have been married for over 30 years, and we have 2 children, a 30-year-old son and a 29-year-old daughter. We were high school sweethearts and have an incredible marriage. She is the love of my life. She has been a stay-at-home mom/wife for most of our marriage. Our son lives at home with us, while our daughter, on the other hand, is estranged from us and has lived out of our home since she became an adult. My daughter and my wife have always butt heads like animals. It was extremely difficult being between them and trying to mend things. They just could not get along. My daughter has accused my wife of physical, emotional, and verbal abuse pretty much. As long as we can remember, we had even attended family therapy when my daughter was in middle school, but the therapist determined that my daughter may be making things up for attention. This was also always furthered by the fact that our son has absolutely no issues with his mother. It is just our daughter. My wife is a strict woman, and I've had to have talks with her about reeling it in quite a few times because she could be quite harsh on the kids, but I have never seen or heard her abuse my daughter. Just the typical fights between parents and children. Chores, bad grades, smoking pot, dumb stuff that every kid does. My daughter claimed that my wife was physically abusive, slapping her around, throwing things, and was extremely verbally abusive, calling her fat, ugly, stupid, worthless, all things that my wife denied and definitely things I believe my wife would never say or do. I defended my wife to no end, but also tried my hardest to smooth things over with my daughter. She left home as soon as she was able, citing her mother as the reason and myself as being an enabler, and pretty much never looked back. She never returned home for longer than a day visit. She officially cut us off over a year ago after a fight with her mother over the phone that I did not witness, and we have not heard from her since. My wife told me that it was over a disagreement regarding a babysitting arrangement for my daughter's child, our only grandchild. Attempts to reconcile have not been responded to. She has even refused to meet when family members have passed away and did not attend their funerals. She also has since married, which means I missed my only daughter's wedding, not to mention also losing my relationship with my only grandchild. It has been a huge blow. I began therapy shortly after my daughter severed contact with us because I desperately needed to understand what was happening. My therapist has been great and has walked me through accepting this situation and grieving the loss of my relationship with my daughter. She helped me accept that I may not have done my best with my daughter, but that I cannot change what has happened, and all I can do is wait for my daughter to open up to me again. I decided to begin bringing my wife with me. My wife was extremely against therapy at the start, but decided to come along at my insistence, first together and then on her own. I have since been going much less, but I check in every now and then. My wife admitted to abusing our estranged daughter after denying it for over 20 years. Part 2. My wife recently asked me to come to a session to support her, where she and our therapist dropped a bomb on me. During their solo therapy sessions, they have been discussing and working on my wife accepting that she abused my daughter. After my wife apparently broke down and confided that everything my daughter said was true, and how to move through this and also potentially mending our relationship with my daughter. One of the first steps of this was for my wife to admit to me that everything my daughter said was true, and how to move through this, and also potentially mending our relationship with my daughter. One of the first steps of this was for my wife to admit to me that everything my daughter said about her and their fights was true. My wife also admitted that the fight that ended our relationship with our daughter was because my wife had been calling our granddaughter fat and stupid during the already very rare visits my daughter allowed with granddaughter, who then told my daughter, and my daughter called my wife, and informed her that our relationship was over. I am horrified and have no idea how to proceed. I ended up walking out of the session because it made me physically ill. For 20 years I defended my wife and believed her when she called my daughter a liar, screaming and yelling at my daughter for lying when my daughter was pleading for me to believe her. This is 100% my fault, and I drove her away, and now I don't even know her phone number, her address, how to reach her. I haven't heard my daughter's voice in over a year, and the last time she spoke to me, she told me she never wanted to see me again because I enabled this woman who tormented her for her entire life. And even then I defended my wife. I hate myself more than anything in the world right now. My only daughter. I think my marriage is over. I'm staying with my brother currently, and my wife has been calling me nonstop. Her voicemails range from begging to talk to screaming about how I am not supporting her. My therapist also called and left a message suggesting we try to have another session to move forward, but also encouraged me to take my time. I know I am also at fault. I should have listened and believed my daughter, but I didn't and can't change that, and I just want to know where to go from here. Please, I need advice. What is the rudest thing someone said to you right after you had a baby? My husband was born with problems with his legs and hands. I've been told it was caused by medication. My mother-in-law was prescribed while pregnant. He needed multiple surgeries to try to correct them. After being married a couple of years, we told my in-laws we were expecting. My mother-in-law would talk about the wonderful medication she was on while pregnant. It prevented her from having miscarriages. She told me that I should ask my doctor for it. My doctor told me it was called Day. He explained that it would be what caused my husband's birth defects. It was not mother-in-law's fault. They didn't know the side effects, and she was only doing what she and her doctor thought best. My mother-in-law kept saying I needed these pills. I explained they were off the market since the late 60s and caused birth defects. She explained her pills weren't those pills. She wouldn't have taken them. They were bad. She said my son's birth defects weren't caused by those pills. They were just something that happened. She made it sound like it was my husband's birth defects weren't caused by those pills. They were just something that happened. She made it sound like it was my husband's choice. My doctor explained the pills were sold under several names and no other drugs were sold for that purpose at that time, and my husband had a side effect. He put in my chart my baby's father had prenatal day exposure. My baby is born, and my in-laws came to visit in the hospital. It was in the 80s and the baby was in the nursery. Mother-in-law starts talking about my daughter's legs. She asked, "Are they deformed? Did you check her hands? Did you specifically tell the doctor to check them?" At this point, I'm literally shaking. The nurse heard my mother-in-law talking loudly and came and checked on me and took my blood pressure. The nurse suggested that my in-laws cut the visit short. My mother-in-law announced she wasn't leaving until the doctor checked the baby's legs and fingers. My father-in-law and the nurse ushered mother-in-law out. When mother-in-law left, the nurse came back in and checked on my blood pressure and told me my mother-in-law would not be allowed back in to visit. When I went home, mother-in-law showed up. She mentioned she wasn't to blame for my blood pressure problem, and I better have had the baby checked. I think every special or happy occasion mother-in-law always had something to say to make it upsetting. Odd, when my sister-in-law got pregnant, she didn't mention the pills to her. My sister's husband kissed me and touched my body. My sister and I have always been close, inseparable. Well, we grew up and she got married. Then things changed. Her husband would always give me weird compliments and say inappropriate comments regarding my body. I mentioned it to her on multiple occasions and she said I was over-exaggerating it all, and that's just how he is. I decided I would just keep my distance for a while because I was so uncomfortable, and it was that bad, but she wasn't taking me seriously no matter what I said. Well, a few months later, my sister's gender reveal came along, so of course I wouldn't miss that. As soon as I got there and he laid eyes on me, he got so excited. He bounced right out of his seat next to my sister to run to me for a hug with arms wide. I immediately stepped aside and declined. The whole family saw the situation, and my sister glared at me and didn't say 2 words to me the first 30 minutes I was there. She got over that, and we had a great time. Towards the end of the shower, most people were leaving, but I stayed behind to help my pregnant sister clean up a bit. She then sent me upstairs to get her fluffy slides, as her feet were hurting. Little did I know at the time, that was the moment that would forever change our relationship. I went to get the shoes, and her husband was in the bedroom. As I entered, he made his usual distasteful comments that I ignored. Well, I guess he didn't like that anymore, so as I was just about to walk out the door, he rushed to the door and closed it, forcing his hands all over my body and kissing me. It all happened so fast. I was so disgusted and shocked but managed to punch him and get out the door and ran to get my sister. I explained everything to her, thinking she would be on my side, as I had been telling her about him for months, almost a year. Boy, was I wrong. As I'm telling her what happened, he come downstairs screaming and came up to her saying I wanted him to touch me, and when he didn't want to, I got mad. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but my sister did. She started yelling at me saying I was a puss, that I'll never have her man, and more. By this time, the remaining guests had gathered around. The betrayal I felt at the moment was unbelievable. I just blurted out and told my sister to flick herself, and that she's a horrible person for allowing him to do this to me. I even said she's a bad mom if she allows her child to be around him, as he's an assaulter. I left and haven't since spoken to her, but she's all on Facebook posting like I'm the bad person, saying I caused her stress. He's an assaulter. I left and haven't since spoken to her, but she's all on Facebook posting like I'm the bad person, saying I caused her stress. So basically, am I the a-hole for telling her what she needed to hear? I caught my wife letting our male neighbor rub lotion on her pregnant stomach. This literally happened this morning. I'm posting it here and hoping to vent and maybe get some perspective because I've been extremely upset all day and can't process this productively. My wife is 8 months pregnant with our child. We live next to another married couple who are in their late 30s. I don't like the guy. I found him to be invasive and the weird type of friendly that almost seems to be prying and clingy. I'm not sure if that's clouding my judgment here or if this validated my beliefs about him. I left for work, decided on the way there. I just wasn't feeling it and called off. I stopped for breakfast before heading home to surprise my wife, 40 minutes tops. I get home, enter from the back door, and here's my wife and my neighbor sitting in our living room on the couch. She's turned toward him, fully clothed, but with her shirt pulled up over her very pregnant stomach while he, facing her, is rubbing lotion on her stomach with both hands. They both froze before my wife asked how come I was back and then said his name, stopped by to borrow the toolbox while I was moisturizing, and wanted to know if he could feel the baby, so I said, okay. I told him to get out before I put him out. and he left immediately. I tried to stay calm and talk to her and get the whole story. Neighbor's wife is apparently infertile. First I heard of it, which is amazing considering the guy never shuts up about his personal woes, and he wanted to feel the baby. That's her story, and she's sticking to it. That's not good enough for me. My thought process is there's a big difference between feeling a baby for 10 seconds and coming into our home and rubbing lotion on my wife's stomach. If it was some close friend of ours, I might understand, but I dislike the guy, and my wife has never expressed any sort of closeness to him aside from passing pleasantries, and she's not the type to let anyone she isn't close to put their hands on her. So in the span on a day, the guy goes from being a distant acquaintance of hers at best to her deciding to invite him in and let him rub her. I also find it convenient that he showed up that early, right after I went to work, very shortly after his own wife also left for work, and he's never came over asking to borrow anything of mine before, yet 9:30-ish in the morning, and he urgently needs a toolbox. I don't believe my wife. This is the first time I trust in her hasn't been strong enough. I don't believe her story because it makes no sense. When I told her I'd be mentioning this to his wife, she was adamant I don't believe my wife. This is the first time my trust in her hasn't been strong enough. I don't believe her story because it makes no sense. When I told her I'd be mentioning this to his wife, she was adamant I don't, as not to make more of it than it is. If it was innocent, what more is there to make? And even if nothing more is going on, I'm not okay with what I seen. I'm not okay with him rubbing my unborn child in my home without me there. I know it's her body and her choice, but I'm not okay with this. It'd be one thing to feel the baby kick, but he was sitting reclined comfortably on our sofa, rubbing a lotion on her with both leaned into their private conversation. I'm trying really hard to figure out how to express the fact I don't believe her story without causing stress that'd be dangerous for her or our baby. I don't want to pick a fight with her at this stage of her pregnancy, but at the same time my mind is spinning and I'm not cool with what happened. Any advice would be appreciated. He punched me over a fender bender. I destroyed his life, part 2. Several times in the court he had outbursts. The judge ended up granting me a judgment of approx $50,000. When the judgment was given, the soldier called the judge a son of Beach and that the army would cover for him. So the judge changed his judgment to $80,000, and the judge then asked me if I also wanted to press charges against this soldier in criminal court. Honestly, it was obvious this guy wasn't going to learn a lesson. I told the judge I wanted to pursue criminal charges in addition to the judgment. My lawyer later advised me that if I ever wanted to see the money, I should persuade an international hold. With my judgment, it's likely that a judge would grant me an international hold. An international hold is basically where this soldier would not be allowed to leave the country until I was paid my $80,000. Also, he told me that according to the agreement between the U.S. military and the host country, the U.S. military would honor the international hold. Basically, the U.S. military would not protect him or move him out of the country to avoid punishment. Honestly, by this point I had paid my lawyer thousands of dollars, and I honestly didn't feel like paying thousands of dollars and getting nothing for it. So I said yes, I want to go forward with the international hold. About a month later, the international hold was granted, and the U.S. military was informed of this. 2 months after that, the criminal case was over, and the soldier was sentenced to 90 days in jail. By this point, the soldier had been moved onto the base into his barracks by his commander. I remember the day I was informed the MPs handed him over to the local authorities to begin his 90-day jail sentence. Did I mention he still owed me $80,000? I heard nothing for a year, and then one day I got a call from his commander. His commander wants me to make a statement regarding the case. I go in and make the statement. During the statement, I found out the U.S. military was in the process of chasing the soldier out of the U.S. military. The commander also informed me that he was close to coming up with the money to pay me so he could have the international hold lifted. The commander also asked me if my lawyer would be willing to make a statement. I contacted my lawyer, who also made a statement about the facts of the case. A few weeks later, his ex-wife contacted me. When this all started, I knew he was married. Guess his wife decided to divorce him. She informed that his ex-husband had the money and needed the details on how to pay me. I provided her the details, and a few days later, I got the payment and contacted his ex-wife to inform her I had been paid. She then asked me to send a receipt so he could have the international hold lifted and returned to the States. I asked her how he got the money. She said he maxed out his credit, and also had family help out. Also during this conversation, I had found out the Army had chaptered him out of the military. I sent her the receipt and that was the last I ever heard from his side. As a surgeon, what is the scariest thing you've seen in the operating room? A 30-year-old man came to see me for unexplained visual loss in one eye. I thought there was a mass pushing against his left optic nerve and ordered an MRI. This demonstrated that the mass was in fact a large aneurysm of his carotid artery against the brain. The protocol was to send such cases to the vascular neurosurgeon who saw him the same day. He agreed on the diagnosis and ordered an angiogram to better show the aneurysm. Both the angiogram and surgery were set for the next morning. This was about 1987 and there was no way of fixing the aneurysm without open neurosurgery. We were lucky as Dr. T was world famous for his technical ability, and he was kind to allow me to come as his assistant. The skull was opened by the resident by drilling 4 holes that were then connected with an electric saw that had a ridge to protect the soft brain beneath. The large skull flap was removed, and the underlying dura, tough skin around the brain, cut and flapped back, exposing the brain. For the next hour, the chief resident pushed and manipulated the brain to one side, and then a ridge of bone had to be drilled down for better exposure. Then we had a clear view, the juncture of the carotid and ophthalmic arteries with a big bulging arterial aneurysm coming straight up at us. Before touching this, Dr. T placed 2 cords around the carotids on both sides, just in case, he explained. Then, a silver aneurysm clip was slipped in behind the aneurysm and slowly released, allowing the 2 prongs to cinch closed over the neck of the aneurysm. Only I didn't get to see the last part. Suddenly the entire brain pan filled with blood. I was suctioning but couldn't keep up with the outpouring of blood. The resident ripped his suction tip off, and I followed suit, so we went with these hoses into the bloody opening, but we couldn't make any headway or even see the brain. Dr. T couldn't see a thing, and blood was spilling up and over the edges of the skull. A nurse started to read the falling blood pressures, 110/65, 90/50, 70/40, 55/0. Then the anesthesiologist said, "We've lost him." Blood pressure crashed to unmeasurable. The nurse was squeezing bags of blood into him, but couldn't keep up with what was pouring out. Now if this happens in the abdomen, you can press the bleeder or place clamps, but in the brain, you don't have those options. But cool as a cucumber, Dr. T stuck his hands below the surface of the blood and began feeling about. He tied off the carotids proximal to the bleed. Then suddenly our suction worked, and the blood pressure came up from 0. Dr. T examined the area and laughed. "There was a second aneurysm hiding behind the first one," he exclaimed. A second silver clip was placed. Then the carotid ligatures were removed. I turned to the anesthesiologist and said, "Were you scared?" "No," he said. "Just sad." He was dead and I saw no hope that we could get him back. Such a young man. 2 hours later, I related the story to the patient's wife. On follow-up, the patient did great. He even got his vision back. I have never seen such cold-blooded rapid action under fire. Dr. T didn't even take a second to swear. Afterwards, in the doctor's lounge, he smiled and said, "It's more fun when it goes like that." What facts about Japan do foreigners not believe until they come to Japan? While I have lived in Japan for almost 3 years, and the below incidents were hard to believe when they occurred, we took a taxi very late at night after we missed the last train to reach our place. The total bill was about yen $20,000. But taxi driver took only about yen $16,000, saying that he took a wrong turn, and it has cost yen $4,000 excess bill, and he won't take that. My friend got his train pass made for yen 10,000 and lost it on the same day. It could have been used by anyone, but somebody returned it to rails personnel, and we got it back the next day when we inquired about it. While coming back in taxi from market to our place, we didn't have exact change to pay to driver, and driver also didn't have it. We asked him to stay for 5 minutes so that we could get it from somewhere. He felt so much guilt for causing us the inconvenience that he apologized to us and left without taking any money. On a Friday night, we came back from office at around 11 p.m. and were looking for some beer. We asked to a person who was standing at counter of a Starbucks company cafe. He was so much eager to help us that he came with us for around 200 meters, leaving his counter to his colleague, and made sure that we find a beer shop. While traveling in train on a Saturday night, there was a co-passenger girl who was so much drunk that she puked in the train itself. The other co-passengers provided her the tissues and a plastic bag, and despite being so drunk, the girl cleaned everything and apologized to everyone. While in Tokyo Disneyland, we asked a sweeper worker to take our snapshot photo. He kept his broom aside at some distance and took our snap. After we were done, some other group came and asked him to take their snap. We went ahead to see other attractions. After around 1 hour, we came back to same point and saw a queue at that point for getting a snap done from that sweeper. The person was happily and enthusiastically taking everyone's snap. So much humility, I can go on and on. Point and saw a queue at that point for getting a snap done from that sweeper. The person was happily and enthusiastically taking everyone's snap. So much humility. My father blamed my sister for my mother's death, and now that she calls me daddy, he regrets everything. I'm a 24-year-old male and the older brother to my 5-year-old sister. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to her as Belle for some background. My parents had me as teenagers. They were 15 and 16 at the time, and even as a kid I could always feel that they regretted having me. After I was born, both my mother and father were practically disowned by their families. My mother had to drop out of high school to take care of me, while my father worked 2 jobs just to provide, and even then they couldn't afford a home. They lived with my mother's older sister until I was 9, and my father got his GED and managed to get a better job and move us out. Despite the fact our living situation was better, it was clear to me that they believed their lives were ruined because of me. Whenever I misbehaved like any normal child, they'd use the fact that they gave up their lives for me and I still had the audacity to behave like this. And even when I never misbehaved, they never treated me with much love. I barely got to get new clothing. They'd get my clothes from Goodwill and practically refused to get me anything nice unless they had 2 birthdays, parties, meeting friends, and their wedding. My birthdays were always celebrated with a bare minimum. They'd get me a cupcake and a single gift, nothing that I wanted. Despite everything, I was still a child who just wanted their love. But as I grew older, I began to accept I wouldn't get it and made peace with that. I guess somewhere along the line, when my parents realized, I gave up on them. As throughout my teen years, they, mainly my mother, began to treat me better. But at that point, I wasn't the child who begged for their love anymore. I never received the love of my parents, and I wasn't asking for it anymore. Although I can't say I kept hating them. In fact, I began to feel neutral towards them. In my eyes, we were practically strangers. I never got to know them truly, as they raised me with the bare minimum, and never had any real conversations with me and never spent any quality time with me. They also knew nothing about me, so suddenly trying to play parents with me was awkward to say the least. When I was 18, my mother got pregnant, and I guess that was when they gave up on trying to fix things with me, as they could have a new child to start over with. They didn't treat me poorly again, but instead it felt like we were strangers living in the same home. When I turned 19, my mother gave birth to a girl, but due to some complications, she didn't end up surviving. This crushed my father. Not only did he begin to resent me for not being as sad as he was over her death. She was barely a mother to me, so there wasn't much to be sad over, but he also blamed his daughter for unaliving his wife. He was never home after the incident, and I was left taking care of my sister. I ended up having to take a break from college after the time I came home from my classes, to my sister screaming with hunger in an unchanged diaper while my father was out drinking. I took care of Belle full-time and called out my father multiple times, but he always got angry and ended the convo with him saying I could always leave Belle at the fire station. I eventually gave up on forcing him to be a father. Despite everything, I truly loved Belle. She was the sweetest and cutest kid. She was almost always smiley, and surprisingly slept through the night. Once she was old enough, I enrolled her in daycare and continued my education while working night shifts. I always made sure to leave a good portion of afternoons empty so I could spend time with her. She always knew who her actual father was, and as she grew older, she began to try and spend time with him. I guess as she began to follow him around the house, of course that quickly ended after he blew up on her and she began to fear him. I realized she saw me as a parental figure despite the fact she knew I was her brother. When she was old enough for preschool, I found out she was telling people I was her father. I never mentioned it to her and just let it be until she gave her Father's Day card she made in preschool to me. My husband's girl best friend is pregnant and she says it's his. I stood up and told my husband that I felt uncomfortable and that I needed to go to the bathroom and ask where it was. Laura told me that I left the table doing breathing exercises, trying to calm down. I ended up messaging my brother from the bathroom, and he said I was being jealous and that I was overreacting. So I agreed and went back to the table to sit next to Laura's mother. The whole time they were laughing, and it seemed that everything he said was funny to her, and she kept rubbing his back, touching his arms, and saying how strong he had gotten, and she would look at me smugly. The breaking point to all of this was when I put a bit of meat onto my plate, and she said, "Are you really going to eat all of that?" And I froze, an embarrassment, while my husband and her laughed. Her mother stood up for me, saying that was inappropriate and a treat guest with respect, but she ignored it. Laura is very pretty and slim and works out, so coming from her, it hurt a lot. I stood up from my chair and walked out the front door and called my dad. I told him to pick me up and that I'll explain why in the car. When I got in the car, I broke down and told him everything. He said I was most likely overreacting, but the situation was very odd, and that I'm welcome to stay with him for the time being. I thanked him and went back to our house. While I was getting comfortable, my phone flooded up with messages from my husband and Laura. I read the messages, and to my horror, my husband was saying I ruined the whole dinner, and that he was going to stay there for the night. I then read what Laura said, saying I had ruined her night because of my pick-me behavior. After doing research on that word, it only filled me up with more anger. My husband came home around 5 p.m. from Laura, and I immediately said leaving me and staying at another woman's house was disgusting. And he started shouting that I'm overreacting again, and that I need to go to counseling for my jealousy issues. For about a month everything was going okay again, apart from that my husband getting more distant and cold, and I could feel that our argument wedged a gap in our marriage until I got a message from Laura this morning, with a positive pregnancy result and a threat saying we should get divorced because it's my husband's. I don't know what to do, and I'm just venting because I feel awful, and I feel like I failed as a wife. My husband's girl best friend is pregnant and she says it's his. So I met my husband, and we hit it off instantly. He was the man of my dreams. He took me on date nights and made sure I was loved and gave me big gifts every so often, telling me I was the only one for him. I believe this since we have been together for 4 years now, and I've never had any issues until he introduced his best friend, who we will call Laura for privacy reasons. I remember we had an argument because he didn't tell me about her for our whole relationship, and he had been sneaking to see her and hang out with her at parties when I was sleeping, believing that he was working overtime. I was hurt by this, and my first thought immediately went to infidelity. But I found all of their texts to be platonic after he willingly told me to look. I thought she was nice at first, since when I first met her she spoke to me politely and said how lucky I was for about a week, until there was a get-together. And my husband invited me along because it was her mother's anniversary, and her family loved my husband, as they had known each other since they were kids. I was okay with this and quite excited, since I wanted to make more female friends and have girls. Nights out to relieve my work stress since my job is difficult, and I make 6 figures. I should also mention my husband works in an office job that doesn't pay a lot, so I handle all of the house bills and chores while he is trying to get another job. I walked into the house with my husband, and she ran to him happily and immediately wrapped her whole body around his arm and dragged him off to the garden. He didn't even come to get me or anything after being dragged away, so I went to the kitchen to ask for a drink, where I was greeted by Laura's mother. She is a lovely person. We generally had a nice talk about our own lives, and she made sure I felt welcome. The whole gathering was mainly nothing special till it got to the dinner. I sat down next to my husband, and Laura walked up to me and asked me to move. I asked why, since the only other spot available was next to her uncle and mother, and since it was about her mother, wouldn't she want to sit next to her? Laura replied to the question with, because I want to sit next to him. I turned to my husband, who just nodded and told me to move as well, saying that I was being childish and making a scene. At this point, I generally felt my blood boiling. My fiancé wants to go on a romantic dinner with her boss. Part 2. I told her I might be a hole, but I'm not stupid. She told me over and over again he's married. He can't do anything that would affect his marriage. So you're being the stupid one that leads me to believe that even she understands the larger implications that are at play here. She locked herself in our bedroom and hasn't come out for at least an hour. She ended up going to the event and came back later on Sunday evening. She didn't speak to me all day Monday, and the last words I heard from her were Sunday night after she got home, as she slammed the door to our bedroom saying, "You're still controlling a hole and we're breaking up." Her nuclear bomb is always saying we're breaking up whenever she doesn't have the upper hand in an argument, so I didn't make much of it. And in reality, I was just relieved that she was home. And apparently nothing bad happened at the dinner. So like I said Monday, she didn't say a word to me. I was only able to get into our bedroom to get some clothes, and I couched it again Monday night. Whatever. She was mad. She was embarrassed that she didn't see it coming. She was angry at me. I figured I'd give her some space, so I did. Tuesday morning, I noticed she was getting ready for work. I couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore, and I incredulously asked her if she was really going back to that job. She said, "Why wouldn't I?" I told her because the owner of the company had done a month-long manipulation to get her into a three-way with his other little side piece. She said that I was an idiot. I was flabbergasted as she was stomping around the house, putting her shoes on, putting on her makeup and whatnot. I told her that if she shows up to that office today and doesn't quit or follow up with the state bar, he is going to know that she's okay with what happened, at least on the surface. Even if she doesn't have intimacy with him, he knows that she has a really high tolerance for his bullcrap, and he's going to keep working at her. I also told her that she has an MBA with a focus in HR. It shouldn't take an angry redneck auto mechanic to tell her this. Her last words to me were, "Yes, effing a hole. I am the professional, you aren't," and slammed the door. So Tuesday, I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew it myself. She just sat almost catatonic on the couch watching Big Bang Theory, which she hates. My assumption, she egged him, her, or both. She gave in to him. I have no proof of this, but after all the bull crap, after the quick change in her behavior, it's the only thing I can think happened. I was in a meeting with my boss, and I was talking to him about the news. He said, "I'm not going to be able to work with you, but I'm going to be able to work with you." I said, "I'm not going to be able to work with you, but I'm going to be able to work with," but after all the bull crap, after the quick change in her behavior, it's the only thing I can think happened. My fiancé wants to go on a romantic dinner with her boss. I have been with my fiancé for several years now. She recently graduated and got an amazing HR job with a pretty high-profile law firm. The guy who started the firm is known across as being an ambulance chaser, shyster, and scammer. Because very frankly, he's trying to portray that in his commercials. So right after New Year's, my wife came home and announced that lawyer dude is taking the whole staff out to celebrate on January 20th, because it was the firm's biggest year ever. This is the timeline. January 5th, she tells me to keep. January 20th open because partners are invited. Cool, I can do that. January 8th, sorry, she was mistaken. It's just a work party. She tells me it's cool if I make other plans that night. No problem. January 13th. She lets it slip. It's not really a party for the whole office, just for the people the boss thinks were part of the success. I'm starting to get a little sussy-wussy here. January 14th. Miraculously, all the people going to dinner with the boss are under the age of 30 and female. Now alarm bells are really going off. January 18th. The list is down to 2 people, my wife and another new attorney. So if I'm hearing this correctly, The two people mainly responsible for this 20-year-old company's biggest year ever are both recent college grads, both female and both around 25. My fiancé says, "Aren't you proud of me?" A few days ago, the big day, boss texts her at like 11 a.m. and says, "Hey, since this is supposed to be a celebration, don't drive. I'll send a car service for you." Fiancé still doesn't smell anything fishy, so I ask her, just for my own edification, ask what he says. If she tells him that's a great offer, but my fiancé knows the restaurant and he can drive me. Boss replies back in second, "Sorry if I had to change restaurants at the last minute. I'll send the car." My fiancé looks at me, apparently without the screeching submarine clacks and illuminated lights that are going off, in my head, and says, "See, it's all cool. I'll just take the car service." I'm freaking the F out. I told her that she can't go. She called me to control a hole. I told her that this whole thing is really shady, as F and I relayed out the timeline as evidence. She said that me hoarding evidence like this is an example of how I'm controlling a whole, and she wants to go to dinner now more than ever. As a teacher, what's the darkest thing you've heard a student say? He was 15 and more streetwise than I ever could imagine. He was always hyper-vigilant about his surroundings. He was brought to our area by a dedicated group that was trying to help young boys caught up in their neighborhood gangs. This boy had been on the street more than he had been in school, but he was so bright he could learn easily if he wanted. He didn't trust anyone, particularly me, an older female teacher that had no idea about the life he lived. Over time, though, we established a bond. He felt a little more at ease in my class, and we would chat after school as he waited for his ride home. One day he confided that his girlfriend was pregnant, but he would be unable to be there for the birth because there was a contract out on him in his old neighborhood. He also said that he'd never see the age of 18, so why try in school? That gave me chills. I was incredulous. He was only 15, how could that be? What could possibly have caused that? Was it bravado? He went on to say, "I'm not going to tell you the things I've done because you'd have to report them." I explained that just what he had confided I'd have to share as a mandated reporter, and he said he figured that. No problem. He also said that he was going to run away from the group home when the time was right and go to Texas where he had relatives. The leaders of the home were aware, and they tried to monitor his schedule very carefully. Soon after he found his opening and ran, he evidently made it to Texas. I was relieved that he was in a new environment, and I hoped that his future would be a positive one. Unfortunately, he was drawn to return to his home neighborhood when his girlfriend gave birth. His best friend suggested a walk around the block to take a break from the hospital atmosphere. A car pulled up, shots were fired, and he lay dead on the sidewalk. The friend, nowhere to be found. There was one brief paragraph in the paper about his death, and it was dismissive. It made me angry. He was only 15. I think about him often. I wonder about his girlfriend and their child. Will the cycle continue, or have they found a safer life? During labor and childbirth, was there anything that took you completely by surprise? I had been in labor for around 16 hours with no food and water. Whatever I ate, I threw up within a few minutes. When daughter came out of me after a lot of struggles with pushing and cutting her cord that was wrapped around her, I heaved a sigh of relief when she was taken out, and I was finally free of the pain. I laid there on the table for some time when I noticed there wasn't any movement around me. My daughter was crying her lungs out. I opened my eyes to see 3 nurses bent over my daughter. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Wasn't a baby crying a good sign?" "Yes, you relax," said the nurse. I closed my eyes again. There was a whispering amongst the nurses again, so this time I asked, little tensed, "Please tell me, is everything all right?" "Your baby came out all hungry," and all the nurses laughed. "This is the 2nd dose of milk that we are giving her. She wants more. Never seen a just-born this hungry," said the nurse closest to her. Her which had a syringe of milk in her hand, and daughter was sucking it in with full force. Well, that's an exact copy of my husband I have in there. I had chuckled all surprised. When they wrapped her up all contented and gave her to me, she gave me the grumpiest look ever. Now I know what that look was for. "You think it's easy being hungry, Mom. Couldn't you have gotten this over soon? It's been that day and today. She can go on without play, TV, or even sleep. But food is her soul. Can't do without it. Just like her father. No wonder she smiled at him the moment he picked her up for the first time. She recognized her partner in crime.